Thanks for downloading the McKay interview. My guest today is the prominent Swiss lawyer François Carrard, Director General of the International Olympic Committee from 1989 to 2003. That period included the Winter and Summer Games in Albertville, Barcelona, Lillehammer, Atlanta, Nagano, Sydney, and Salt Lake City. We talk, among other things, about the recent 32nd Olympiad in Tokyo, ideals versus money in sport, and what the true meaning of sport actually is. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Hello everyone. Today's interview is devoted to sport. In fact, more particularly, it is devoted to the Modern Olympics. And I'm in the Olympic city of Lausanne in Switzerland, a home of the International Olympic Committee and not so far from where I live. Those of you who know me well are probably aware that I started my professional life as a teacher of physical education, yes, of sports. I taught some other subjects as well, but essentially I was a PE teacher. And if you're British and old enough to remember Ken Loach's famous film, Kes, back in 1970, I attended the same college, Carnegie College, as Billy Casper's overbearing PE master, I think Mr. Sugden, as I recall, though my recollection is that he was not a good advert for that proud and famous college in Leeds, which I attended. But I digress. Coming from that generation which grew up in Britain, the Britain of black and white TV and radio newsreels, where the only way to see top sport was to go to the stadium and see it live, or else wait a few days or even weeks until the film was produced, and then see it in your local cinema. And coming from that generation, it is clear and obvious how much sport has changed, like many other things. The Olympic movement is the very pinnacle of sport, and today, with the help of someone with deep inside knowledge and practical experience over a great number of years, I want, with his help, to take a closer look and understand not just what in sport has changed and why it has changed, but whether sport is actually better for it. My guest today is François Carrard. If you are Swiss and involved in administration and management of sport, especially an Olympic sport, then you'll probably recognize his name. He's very well known and much respected. He's a lawyer by profession, in fact a doctor of law, with a very distinguished career and reputation, but was also the Director General of the International Olympic Committee from 1989 to 2003. So he was closely involved with Winter and Summer Games in Albertville, Barcelona, Lillehammer, Atlanta, Nagano, Sydney, and Salt Lake City. That's quite a list. And as you'll hear as we talk, my guest has a lot of interesting and probably unforgettable experiences to relate. I do not say this lightly or to flatter him, because I happen to be sitting in front of him, but he's one of the best raconteurs I've ever had the pleasure of listening to. Welcome to the McKay interview, François. Thanks for inviting me to your office, and many thanks for making time for me and our listeners across Switzerland and beyond.
Thank you, Michael. It's a great pleasure indeed to be with you today, to see you again after quite a while.
Quite a while.
And it's a privilege for me.
Thank you.
I'm very happy to be with you.
François, my first question is topical. The Summer Olympics in Tokyo finished just over 2 months ago under the most difficult of exceptional circumstances for the host country, not to mention the athletes. The Games were hailed as a success, despite COVID-19 and the pandemic. What are your reflections on the unforgettable 32nd Olympiad?
Well, my reflections on Tokyo, actually I didn't go to Tokyo. I was due to be there, but I was actually kept so busy by some of the legal problems which were leading to Tokyo and even during the Tokyo Games that I found it better to work in my office in Lausanne rather than sitting on a tatami somewhere in a hotel room in Tokyo. They were very special, but I think the most important thing is that they did take place. That in spite of all the potential obstacles, even the population eventually managed to support them. I think for the athletes it was a great experience. We saw some very, very fantastic results, and of course with the technical possibilities now, the image, the coverage which we got was rather good. And I think it was essential for the Olympic movement that these games took place and were not just cancelled.
And could you just explain to me why you use a word like essential? Why was it so important, given this global pandemic?
Because the Olympic movement has to go on. It's not like the show must go on, but it's a sort of a chain of development of many aspects of the sport, which really, I think there is something symbolical. If the games nowadays were interrupted, this could lead to, the games are currently still in a situation, regardless of COVID, you cannot contemplate holding games in the 21st century as was the case in the 19th and 20th century. And on the other hand, the chain must continue because if not, there's so many other events which tend to compete with the new sports, with the e-sports, with all the possible options for the youth to participate in other forms of events. I think maintaining the presence and the holding of the games is really a must for the Olympic movement.
And could you just give me you mentioned that there were a lot of legal problems, but for those of us who are not as close to these issues as you, give me just a glimpse of the kinds of legal things that came up across your desk.
Well, of course there were, I'll take a ridiculous small example. A small shop owner in Tokyo who had thought that he could rent out his premises for the games in 2020, could not, was cancelled, and he had promised them to someone else for 2021, and he doesn't know anymore how to cope. This is a small, very not major problem, but all kinds of problems, unimaginable. Participation in the games, the impact of COVID on the preparation of the athletes, of the teams.
The training.
They had the training, the qualification. And then, on the other hand, you have some of the main partners, sponsors, broadcasters, which did suffer material prejudice from the... And there are a number of negotiations which are still going on, by the way, after the games, to reconsider some of the conditions.
Okay. François, I pose my next question to you in the following way. Ideals versus money. My question is, has Pierre de Coubertin's vision, he was the founder, as you know, of the Modern Olympics in 1896, has his vision been trashed by Mammon, to use an Old Testament term, by money? Or am I simply being naive, François?
You're not being naive at all, but I think, first of all, de Coubertin's vision, one must never forget it was expressed by an individual in 1894, 96, etc. And you cannot consider that the vision, what would be de Coubertin doing nowadays? Who knows? Who knows? I think personally his vision, the core vision of de Coubertin, is the educational value of sport. Through sport, you can teach values to young children and try somehow to hope that they are better individuals. And I think now the transmission of these values must go on, and I think, but you cannot compare the world of today with the world of the Coubertin. Coubertin, this was his core. It's my personal take. His core real vision was this educational value of sport, but on some other topics, he had visions which would be considered as ghastly nowadays. I mean, he didn't want women in the Olympic Games. And when now, so talking about money, I was always very impressed. During my professional period with the IOC, I met some very extraordinary people, including, for instance, Young, Andrew Young, who was the close to Martin Luther King.
That's right, I met him once.
And Andrew Young always said, without the commercialization and the money, we would never give a chance to the poor kids of the less developed areas like Africa, for instance. And I think money in sport is not bad in itself. It must be, though, controlled in the way that those sport must remain clean. That's essential. But money as such is not a bad thing.
Well, you open up to my next question, which is about the International Olympic Committee. I mean, you're very close to that, or you were very close to it. It's based here in Lausanne.
I'm still close to them.
You're still close to it. And my question is whether they're a worthy custodian of de Coubertin's idea, or has its adaptation and seeming capitulation to the huge amounts of money that flow in rendered it, in a way, undeserving of the legacy and the vision of de Coubertin? Am I again being just a little bit too purist?
No, I understand. I mean, the question is absolutely proper, but again, the world has been changing so much. 1896, you needed a big stadium because you had no media. Now, with the new media, for instance, and the sports competition, the events like the games, are competing with all kinds of other events, possibilities. Our society is totally different, and you cannot consider that the IOC is capitulating, not at all. It is doing its utmost so that, again, what I characterized as the core vision of de Coubertin, that is to say education through sport, remains. But now, of course, what were the sports? You had tug wear, or what was it?
Tug of war, putting on the rope.
Pulling on the rope was a sport. I mean, tug of war. Yeah. I mean, the world is changing.
I'd forgotten. I didn't know that.
It was an Olympic sport, So the world is changing so much. If you want to keep the implementation of that vision, which is to be very close to the young people, even at school level, you also have to take into account what is now appealing to them. Hence, the changes in the sport, and then, of course, the money came into sport. But again, I would say, first of all, as a facilitator and an opportunity for more young people without the means to practice their sports.
And the Olympic Committee sees to it that money is funneled into those young people as much as possible, the young people without means?
At least I think it is absolutely making its best efforts for that. It's about 90% of the money which is flowing into the Olympic movement, thanks to the Games, broadcast rights, etc., is reinvested for solidarity programs, for training, so yes, I think there is a very serious concern about that.
We're going to talk a little bit more about the meaning of sport afterwards, but my guest today is François Carrard, the prominent Swiss lawyer and Director General of the International Olympic Committee from 1989 to 2003. François, I mean, this is not a rhetorical question, but what is a sport? What is the true meaning of sport, in your opinion? I mean, do new sports like beach volleyball for voyeurs and male titillation, surely, skateboarding, breaking or breakdancing still to come in 2024, BMX, bicycling. Do they have a place in the modern Olympiad along with traditional sports like athletics, swimming, gymnastics, even fencing, to mention just a few?
Well, again, if you think of the first sports which were envisaged even by de Coubertin, I remember I bought, when I was Director General, I bought in the United States a large painting of Coubertin who was riding a horse and trying to fight fencing on horseback riding.
At the same time?
At the same time, yeah, which was a little bit original, to say the least. So again, the world of sports has been evolving very much with all the opportunities offered by the new media, and there should be no surprise that for the young people, new sports, new disciplines, new offers come, and the Olympic movement could not lock itself and close the door to what is attracting. I mean, I remember I never forgot the time I saw the arrival of snowboarding, for instance, which was considered by some classical tenets of the ski, no, never snowboard.
Too far.
These guys and these young guys with strange pants and strange cups on their heads and so on and so forth. And then it's now become so classical that that's part of the evolution of sport.
It's very skillful. There's no doubt about that.
But to me, sport, and back to your question, the definition of sport is a tricky challenge, because to me, sport, but this is very personal, has to be essentially physical activity, which can be practiced very simply, or should also be organized so as to ensure fair competition with rules, because Olympism eventually is teaching, as I said, the values, but the value is simple, it's respect. And to me, it's three respects.
You see.
Self-respect means that you practice sport to respect your body, your physical condition, and maybe your mind and character.
So exactly. So despite all the money, you are of the same view as me, that sport is essentially character building.
Right, absolutely. But we must face the fact that nowadays, for instance, there are some discussions with esports. The new media, the social networks have transformed also the society. We are a sort of connected society now, and the eruption of esports, which are very favorably considered by youth, is a challenge. How to cope with that? And of course, there are some fundamentals such as no violence. Violence should be banned, but our society, unfortunately, also has become very violent, and also in the media. So it's a big challenge. You raise a very big challenge, but I think still the Olympic movement, covering the entire world, 206 countries with hundreds of millions of adepts, is still the proper institution to address these challenges.
François, you've lived a long time, and I just wonder where you think all this adaptation will end, and does it really matter to the good health of young people and the wholesomeness of sport? How do you see the future?
Very difficult to predict the future, because if you had asked me that question in late January 2019, I was flying back from Moscow on the sports mission, and COVID was totally, we were not prepared. And COVID does have, I think, in my opinion, an ongoing influence also on sports.
In what respect? When you say that, what's in your mind?
Well, I've seen now suddenly billions of cyclists in the streets, which were not all as many in 2019.
That's true. That's true.
And this is, in my opinion, a consequence of a new way of living due to the consequences of COVID-19. This is just one example. So predicting the future is very difficult. I still believe sport as basically character building based on the physical practice is essential and will remain essential. But what will be now, the Olympic Games are clearly, hopefully, set for 2024 with Paris, 2028 Los Angeles, 2032 Brisbane. But after what, I don't know.
It's hard to predict, isn't it?
Maybe one goes back to roots, to holding the games in one place only because it's so expensive also.
It must be prohibitive because I remember, and I've seen not as many Olympic Games as you have, but all this talk of legacy has been around for decades, and yet I wonder really to what extent the facilities in places like London are really used after the Games have gone.
Well, London was probably not a bad example because I think London did extremely well in the last. But to me, the legacy must be more in the minds and the bodies of the people and the continuation of sport. I mean, the facilities in a changing society. I have advocated for many years, for instance, that one doesn't need any more new huge stadiums.
We have them.
We don't need them. I mean, with the media, you don't need that. And I understand that the plans, for instance, for Paris, from what I heard, would be to hold ceremonies not in the stadiums anymore, but maybe whether it will be Champs-Élysées or something like that. But I mean, people must be creative. So the future of the facilities and the legacies, to me, things will be changing a lot.
François, I want to finish our conversation with a question, a particular question, on the Paralympics.
Yes.
And in particular, a focus on prosthetic devices. Think of Blade Runner. When I was a young man, I was quite quick over 100 meters. I wasn't Olympic standard, but I have an interest in running fast. Prosthetic devices are so advanced that some amputee track athletes are achieving times that make competition with able-bodied, non-disabled athletes. You said Oscar Pistorius from South Africa is just one example, but is running on a prosthesis the same as running on two natural legs? Indeed, does your legal and sporting mind offer any good arguments for allowing the inclusion of Paralympians in Olympic competition? What's your view on that?
This is an ongoing, I think, discussion as to the real place of Paralympics. Should they be directly part of the Olympic movement, as some say, which is not the case now for so many technical reasons right now. But one must not forget, for instance, thinking of Pistorius, I think, if I remember correctly, he was still competing in London. And I think he lodged a complaint because some other Paralympic athletes beat him. It was a Brazilian, if I remember, or someone like that. There was, and he was told by his management to withdraw the complaint because they said if Paralympic athletes start fighting each other in court over the values of the blades and so on and so forth. So Paralympics have provided an extraordinary opportunity to many sports practitioners to have a chance to practice their sports. The full integration is an issue which I don't know. I don't have an answer. I don't have an answer to that.
It's complex, isn't it? Because there's an emotional
Very
dimension.
complex. Absolutely.
You know, there's a physical dimension.
Absolutely.
And somehow it's hard to separate the two.
Absolutely, absolutely. But one must recognize their extraordinary performances, providing these athletes with opportunities to also be visible is of course very important for them. But some people say you should not have any Paralympics anymore, but just integrate some events into the Olympics. But the discussion is going on.
François, it's been fascinating listening to you. And you can imagine that I have many more questions if time would allow. But your insights are invaluable, and I really appreciate you making time for me. My guest today has been Dr. François Carrard, the eminent Lausanne-based Swiss lawyer who was Director General of the International Olympic Committee between 1989 and 2003. Thank you again, François.
Thank you so much. It was a great, great pleasure indeed.
Thank you for listening. Please share the show with those around you, and if you have any questions or feedback, write to me at contact@mackays.ch. I promise that I will reply to you.